final training in our procurement series, and I wanted to devote it to what we've learned this year about procurement. And we learn from each other. We learn from others' mistakes, from their wisdom, and their experiences. So what I've put together is a compilation of some of the lessons that we've learned this year, some from making mistakes and some from others' wisdom. Just remember that the thresholds for procurement are more stringent with the state than they are with USDA. The state does not require, but does strongly suggest that you obtain 3 written quotes for any procurement between $1,000 to $10,000. USDA, however, requires that us to allow micro purchases to be used for purchases of $10,000 or less. But the SFA also must remember to spread the wealth among qualified suppliers. The SFA has to seek at least 3 quotes for procurements between $10,000 and $30,000, and procurements of more than $30,000 must be formally procured. So what do we want to do? Do we want to do an IFB or we want to do an RFP? Commonly, food and supplies are procured by either using quotes or an IFB because cost is the main factor. But sometimes SFAs have some serious issues with companies not meeting the requirements of their contract. So SFAs report to me that they have difficulty with companies charging the right bid price, delivering within the specified time, product substitutions, shortages, compliance with the Buy American provision, and I'm sure y'all could tell me many more headaches that you have working with some of the companies. All of these problems cost you time and resources when you or your managers have to check every invoice to make sure the prices charged are correct, change the menu because the truck didn't come in on time, or they didn't send the product that you ordered. You received substitutions with items that are not in the contract, or they sent you pears from Thailand rather than US grown and processed canned pears. An SFA can always make the decision to use an RFP, regardless of the dollar value of the procurement. Using an RFP allows you to score the companies on the quality of their service to you or to other SFAs. As always, price has to carry more weight than any other factor, but as you already know, the quality of service they provide is important as well. Don't forget that some micro purchases may also need state agency approval. Any equipment acquisitions and other capital expenditures of $5,000 or more need state agency approval before incurring any of the costs. The exception is the equipment listed on the 2021 pre-approved equipment list, which is at SFS 21-87. The equipment on this list has been approved by USDA and receives automatic approval for the purchase, but the SFA must follow all of the applicable procurement guidelines. And that's been a problem for some because they think that, oh, I just go out and procure it and I'll call it a micro purchase. To quote or not to quote, if the total purchases this year exceeded $30,000, or if you think that it's going to exceed $30,000 next year, you do have to use a formal procurement method. This is a definite challenge, particularly with produce, because produce vendors don't want to lock in prices for a long period of time because the prices are so volatile. But advertising is expensive, and I know you're saying to yourself that doing a formal procurement will just take too much time. One of our SFAs gave me a great idea. They conduct a formal procurement for produce on a monthly basis. They do one advertisement at the beginning of the year, and they include all of the procurement periods and bid opening dates for the year in that one advertisement. As required, they advertise twice in the regional news source, so they're meeting USDA's requirement for advertising. And the SFA uses the same IFB each month unless they decide that something needs to be added or changed. All that has to be changed each time are the dates so that, excuse me, using the process is not as burdensome as you might think. These are some definitions that I want you to kind of become familiar with. When writing any procurement document, be careful when you're using these words. If you want to make an item an absolute necessity, you should always use the word must instead of shall or will. Shall and will can be confused with predicting future actions. If it is a true requirement in order to bid, use the word must. If you use the word should, it infers that it is an obligation, but is not an absolute necessity. Using the word may indicates there's discretion to act. Must not indicates that it is an absolute prohibition. When I was drafting an RFP for the Office of State Purchasing to approve, I was instructed to utilize must, shall, and will as little as possible and to replace it with the word should. Sometimes stating must ties the SFA down to throwing out a bid when there was only a minor problem. So must is not always a must. Several SFAs have found this out the hard way this year by stating that the prospective vendor must provide specific documents in their bid, such as the independent price certificate or the lobbying certification form. And while this makes sense to ensure that you get the documents that you need, stating must could also cause you to be required to throw out the lowest bid as being non-responsive because they did not provide that document. The SFA could have used the word should, which would give them the option of accepting the bid, but requiring the document to be submitted before the bid is awarded. One of our SFAs sent out an addendum to a bid, changing the dates of the contract. The addendum was sent certified mail, return receipt requested. She did not receive the return receipt from one vendor, and there was no way to determine whether the addendum was received by the vendor, so she accepted the proposal. One lesson to be learned here is to make sure that you receive the return receipt from all prospective vendors. But look at this statement on the slide. The statement states, this addendum should be attached to the front of the proposal form and returned as part of the official proposal. Note that the statement says should and not must. So should infers an obligation, but it is not absolutely necessary. The vendor that had not received the addendum and returned the certified mail was the low bidder by over $80,000. But because the word should was used instead of must, the SFA could award the bid to the low bidder and obtain a copy of the signed addendum before awarding the bid. That's definitely a lesson learned. Must just might make me mad. Another SFA sent out a bid that was to be awarded item by item. The bid stated that all frozen items must be delivered to the schools. She received a bid from a supplier, and they only bid on one item, pizza. The vendor gave the SFA a far better price than any of the other vendors, but stated that he could only ship to the warehouse. The SFA director was willing to accept the pizza at the warehouse and distribute to the schools because the price was so good. However, there was a glitch in that plan. The bid stated that all frozen items must be delivered to the schools. If she had accepted the bid, then she could be subject to a bid protest. If the bid had stated that the vendor must be willing and able to deliver all frozen items to the schools unless otherwise directed by the SFA director, the bid could have been accepted because the SFA director had the discretion to allow it to be delivered to the warehouse. The bid could have also stated that the vendor will deliver frozen items to the schools or the warehouse as instructed by the SFA director. So we have to watch that word must. There's been some confusion about whether we have to bid professional services. The Louisiana law does not require SFAs to advertise, receive bids, or engage in competitive negotiations for professional contracts. USDA, however, does require procurement of professional services. Since the federal requirements are more restricted than the state requirement, we must follow the federal requirements and procure professional services as required by USDA. And what about the advertisement? I've seen some extremely wordy advertisements that SFAs have used. Advertising is expensive, so the SFA should strive to shorten their advertisements if possible. The requirements include providing a general description of items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, when the prospective vendors will receive written responses, date of the pre-bid, if there's going to be one, and if attendance is required, the deadline for submitting proposals, the address of where the complete specifications can be obtained, and of course, the short version of the non-discrimination statement. The entire non-discrimination statement is not needed. That is very costly. Of course, the advertisement has to appear in a regional news source at least twice, and that means 2 days. We're always learning something new, it seems. We have recently discovered that in addition to the USDA non-discrimination statement, the state of Louisiana Constitution protects individuals from discrimination based on religion, religious beliefs, religious ideas, beliefs or affiliations, birth, cultural, physical condition, political ideas or affiliations, and national ancestry. The wording can be found on the Civil Rights Complaint Procedures for Child Nutrition Programs form at the link noted on the slide. This verbiage should be included in procurement documents below the entire USDA non-discrimination statement. So it could be included after the words, "This institution is an equal opportunity provider." There's also been some confusion surrounding electronic bid submissions. The revised statute 382212.1 states that public schools must provide vendors the option to submit bids for public contracts through a uniform and secure electronic interactive system. SFAs have been reluctant to put their bids on an electronic bid platform because it can be very expensive. But there are some bid sites where the cost is charged to the vendor that's submitting the bid rather than the SFA. So remember that sending bid documents through email is not considered a uniform and secure electronic interactive system. We've had that question on a number of occasions. Also remember that if a prospective vendor requests to submit their proposal electronically, you cannot also ask them for a paper bid. Affirmative action, and it requires action. It's just not a matter of including this required provision in your formal procurement. The sponsor and the vendor must take all necessary affirmative steps outlined in 2 CFR 200.321 to assure that minority businesses, women's businesses, and labor surplus firms are used when possible. The required affirmative action steps are listed in the sample procurement plan. In summary, the SFAs must place qualified small, minority, and women's businesses on their solicitation list and assure they are solicited when they are potential sources. So when a state agency reviewer asks for proof that you followed the required steps, how are you going to respond? Do you maintain a list of qualified small, minority, and women's owned businesses? Do you know where to look for qualified vendors? The links to the Small Business Association list and the Hudson list are included in the sample procurement plan. These are two sources to review when looking for small, minority, and women-owned businesses. We've had some misunderstandings about all or nothing bids. If you are going to award an all or nothing bid, you must extend the price that each vendor proposes based on the estimated quantity. You have to include the estimated quantity in an all or nothing bid. If you award a bid based on the item price, you may not actually be awarding the bid to the vendor with the lowest overall price. Look at the sample on this slide. If the award is based on the item price, then vendor 3 would win the bid because their total item price is $32.85. But vendor 3 doesn't have the lowest overall price. In fact, their price is higher than both of the other vendors. They are $4,064.11 higher than vendor number 1, because vendor number 1 is $143,896 as opposed to the $147,960.11 that vendor 3's bid was. So vendor 1 should be awarded the bid. We have had an SFA that had to retract a bid award because they based the award on the lowest item price rather than the overall extended price. A milk vendor was threatening a bid protest because they actually were the low bidder based on the total dollars. I see a lot of use of the word equal in bids. So should you use the term equal or pre-approved equal? If I state in my bid specifications that I want scrubbing cleaner number 1 or equal, then looking at the ingredients in these products, they are not equal. There is no exact equal because each manufacturer probably has a slightly different formula. So really stating equal would be considered restricting competition. Or one distributor could argue that my product does an equal job to the product you're requesting, so it should be considered an equal. But if I use the term pre-approved equal and provide the prospective vendors with the procedure to follow to get an equal product pre-approved, then the SFA determines what is considered an equal. It does take more time, but you are more likely to get an acceptable product. One of our SFA directors used the term pre-approved equal in her bid. And what she did was have some of her employees test product 2 provided by the distributor to see if they felt like it was an equal to the brand of product on the bid. The employees were not at all happy with the product and stated that it did not do an equal job. As a result, she didn't allow it as an equal, and all distributors had to bid on product 1. And the icing on the cake was that her employees felt like their opinions were valued in the decision-making process. What were the products? Comet versus Ajax. Now, I personally may prefer one over the other, but I need to have a legitimate way of determining if it is an equal. Another SFA director stated a brand name in her bid and used the term pre-approved equal. She gave prospective vendors a deadline to submit products that could be considered. One prospective vendor wanted to submit the proposed equal product after the deadline she had given for her RFP. If this happens, the director should not accept that product or consider that product. What might happen if the director had allowed the product to be submitted after the deadline? The other vendors could have protested the award because the vendor submitted it after the deadline. Remember that all documents that are a part of your bid process are considered public information. So any vendor can come back and ask for all of the documentation for the bid. But how do I determine equal on software and equipment? I think we could all be found guilty of having a preference with brands of equipment because we all know the main companies in the restaurant equipment world. I know that Vulcan and Hobart and Blodgett are considered good brands of ovens. Many directors don't feel like they have the expertise to determine what would be considered equal when procuring items like software or equipment. So we need to seek information and guidance from people that do have the knowledge. Your maintenance department or your IT department can be invaluable sources for assisting you in determining if the products that were being proposed are equal. You also can search the products through the internet, and sometimes you can even find comparisons of equipment online. Again, using the term pre-approved equal allows you the flexibility to do your research and possibly limit the number of different brands proposed. Make sure that you give yourself ample time between letting the bid and the bid opening date to complete your research. Just remember that any distributor or broker that develops or drafts specifications, requirements, statements of work, IFBs or RFPs must be excluded from competing on the procurement. This is a regulation and can be found at 2 CFR 200.319. I've been asked many times by SFA directors whether the Buy American provision applies to equipment, and the answer is no. The Buy American requirement applies only to U.S. grown and processed agricultural products. But 2 CFR 200.322 does state that an SFA procuring equipment under a federal award should provide a preference for the purchase of goods and products. But of course, USDA requires competition for the best price, so it's sort of a balancing act. Out of curiosity, I researched where some ovens were manufactured, and all Hobart, Blodgett, and Vulcan are all three U.S. companies. Of course, ovens have many parts. So that doesn't mean that even though it's a U.S. company, that all the parts came from the US. This is another question we get a lot. Can I use cooperative pricing? Memo SFS 17-07 is a Q&A on purchasing goods and services using cooperative agreements and third-party services. That Q&A states that when competitive procurement methods are conducted by the program operator, GPO price lists may be used as one source of prices when using small procurement procedures, sealed bids, or competitive proposals. So what this memo means is that when an SFA is conducting a procurement, they may compare the prices received by vendors to the cooperative pricing and can use the cooperative pricing if their price is cheaper. If you plan to compare the prices received by vendors to a cooperative's pricing, make sure you state that in your bid. This is different than an SFA just saying that I'm just going to use the cooperative prices so I don't have to go out to bid. This is not allowable. Third-party delivery. Have everything in the contract. This is some advice from one of our SFA directors regarding allowing third-party deliveries. Include delivery dates and times in your contract. Make sure that the contract includes the specifications on delivery. Do you require the items to be delivered inside your building and specify where inside the building? Otherwise, you may be left with a pallet of frozen pizza sitting on your curb with no way to get the pallet inside your freezer. Third-party vendors often have additional fees for delivering inside. If one vendor wants to ship via a third-party delivery service, but the delivery service is going to charge more for delivering inside or to the freezer, they may not be the lowest bidder. And COVID-19 changed many third-party vendors' policies on delivering inside. I was having an outdoor patio set being delivered to my home, and they wanted to only deliver to the driveway during COVID. Well, nobody was going to be home but me, and I didn't want to leave the patio set in the driveway until someone was home to assist me. So I did get them to agree to drop ship it to the garage, but only if I didn't have contact with the delivery driver. So COVID's caused some problems with delivery too. If you'll notice, I added this contracting for additional goods and services into the sample procurement plan this year because SFAs that are contracting for goods may include a provision in the original solicitation that states they reserve the right to add goods to an existing contract if the following conditions are met. The SFA must state in the original solicitation that the total value of all additional goods and quantities of listed goods may not exceed the limit that they specify. The SFA may use a percentage of the estimated total value of the contract to determine the value of goods and quantities of goods that may be added. Kind of sounds like blah, 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 huh? USDA recommends limiting additional costs to 5 to 10% of the estimated value of the contract. And the total estimated value of the contract must be included in the solicitation. Also, if you have a renewal option and the renewal is approved as established in the original contract, then upon renewal, any goods added to the contract must be included in the contract amendment. And if the contract is renewed, you have a new basis for your contract value that includes the actual expenditures of the previous bid period plus the additional value of the goods. And you may actually find that the prices fall below the estimated price of the original contract. Make sure that you maintain all of your records of additional goods purchased to ensure that you don't exceed that specified limit. But adding this verbiage to a proposal gives the SFA director the flexibility to purchase new items they forget to add to their proposal, or to increase the quantity of an item where the estimated quantity was too low. It does require the SFA to keep records of these purchases to ensure that they don't exceed the percent increase that they listed. I can't tell you how many times I've received phone calls. I forgot one thing on my bid. How do I go about procuring it? So in some cases, having this in your contract will allow you to purchase these additional goods without exceeding your contract value. Termination for cause and convenience. As you know, these are required provisions in all formal procurements. On many occasions, when I review procurement documents, the SFA includes this language on the slide rather than including the conditions that would cause the SFA to terminate the contract. So there is some sample language in the procurement plan. However, the SFA is free to utilize their own language for both cause and convenience. The language in the procurement plan for termination for convenience states that the SFA reserves the right to terminate the contract at any time for any reason by giving X number of days notice to the contractor. It also states that if the contract termination is not the fault of the vendor, they will be paid for all items received or any work completed as of the date of termination. You need to be specific about your termination for cause. We also provide some language in the procurement plan for termination for cause that states that when the contractor is in default, the SFA can purchase all products on the open market and charge the vendor with the excess costs. It also states that until those assessed charges are paid, no bid from the defaulting contractor will be considered. And it states that the SFA reserves the right to terminate the contract for any reason by providing the contractor with X days notice. The number of days is up to the SFA, but typically it's usually 30 to 60 days. There's also a list of actions that can cause an SFA to terminate a contract. Some are failure to deliver within the time frame specified, not meeting quantity requirements, failure to meet the specifications of the contract, and several others. Having this language in your contract protects the SFA. If you need to disqualify a vendor from bidding, make sure you follow the procedures in the procurement plan. The vendor must be notified of the disqualifications in writing and be provided the opportunity for a hearing. If you disqualify a vendor for a specified period of time, after the time has elapsed, the vendor must be allowed to submit a bid. But there are no requirements that you allow a vendor to bid if a period of time is not specified. We've actually had several SFA directors this year that have had an issue with tie bids. This typically happens when the SFA is awarding an item by item bid and two vendors will give the exact same price. The SFA should include what steps they will use to award a tie bid in their proposal. The SFA could split the award between the tie bidders, or they could do a coin toss to determine who will be awarded an item. Of course, if the SFA uses an all or nothing bid, there typically is no tie bids. But make sure whatever method you plan to use, that you put it in the original proposal. Oftentimes, particularly with our smaller SFAs, only one vendor responds to a bid. The SFA never wants to be in the situation where they have to accept the prices of the only responding bidder. The SFA needs to give themselves some options in their procurement document. You can include the statement that bids will be compared to the state contract or even a purchasing cooperative to determine if their prices are cheaper. Procurements that are sent to at least 3 prospective vendors, but only receive 1 response, do not have to seek state agency approval to award the procurement. SFA directors are required to seek state agency approval when they are conducting a non-competitive procurement, such as when an item is available only from 1 source. Vendor statement of no bid. And I highly recommend that you include a vendor statement of no bid in both your quotes and in your formal procurements. And you request that the vendor complete if they are choosing not to bid and return this document to you. I know it's small, but the document says, due to the limited number of vendors in our area, we are encouraged to seek out and request a statement of no bid in order to maintain compliance with federal and state procurement requirements whenever there is a limited competitive bidding. If your company does not intend to submit a bid, your submission of the statement of no bid will help us meet the justification requirements for a contract award. All vendors are highly encouraged to submit a bid whenever possible. USDA encourages SFAs to review the procurement process when they receive only 1 bid to determine if there's something that the SFA could do different that would encourage competition. Could you be sending the bid to a company that doesn't really offer the product? Is the company unable to meet your specifications or your procurement requirements? And if so, can the SFA make changes to the specifications or requirements to encourage competition? A big one is that many companies don't want to deliver to your location. You may be far out of the way or rural. Could your SFA partner with a nearby SFA to help make it worthwhile for the company to come to your area? You're asking the vendors what you could do differently that would encourage them to submit a bid for your business. The independent price certificate, it's also included in the sample procurement plan. And what it does is it is signed by both the offerer of the SFA, offerer and the SFA, and the SFA maintains it on file with their procurement documents. And it certifies that the prices in the offer have been arrived at independently by the offerer, that the prices quoted in the offer have not knowingly been disclosed to any other offerer prior to opening the bids, and certifies that no attempt has been made by the offerer to induce any person or firm to submit or not submit an offer for the purpose of restricting competition. The debarment and suspension, SFAs can't award a contract to any company that is listed on the government-wide exclusions in the System for Award Management, commonly known as SAM. Each vendor must complete the suspension and debarment certificate before the contract can be awarded. This is what it looks like. Again, it's included in your sample procurement plan. I had completed this training and come to find out early this week, SAM updated their website. So I had to change my slide because it looks a little bit different. But the System for Award Management, or SAM, is an official website of the U.S. government. And any business that wants to do business with the federal government has to obtain a DUNS number and be registered and remain active in SAM. The Dun and Bradstreet DUNS number is a unique 9-digit identifier for businesses. The business must update their entity registration on a yearly basis. A business can be suspended from doing business with the federal government if they have committed fraud, embezzlement, theft, forgery, bribery, tax evasion, violation of antitrust statutes, willful or a history of failure to perform, violations of the Drug-Free Workplace Act, delinquent federal taxes of more than $3,000, and a number of other reasons. Before you award a contract, you should obtain the prospective vendor's DUNS number and check the SAM.GOV website to ensure the vendor is active before awarding a contract. You can look the vendor up by name, but the names are often, it's a very simple search engine, and so the names sometimes do not come up the way you'd like them to. This screenshot is from the SAM.GOV website, and it shows one of our local produce companies, Capital City Produce, is active in SAM. I have to tell you, though, that I searched 5 different vendors that are used by our SFAs before I found one that was active. So that means that the SFAs are not checking in SAM to make sure that the company that they're doing business with is active in SAMs. So remember that contracting and paying a vendor that is not active in SAM is not allowable, and USDA could deem the payments to the vendor as unallowable. A vendor could choose to list their business as private with SAM, where the SFA cannot view whether the vendor is active or inactive. The SFA does not have to accept the bid if a vendor will not provide them access to view their SAM status online. You should be familiar with the lobbying certification. The lobbying certification must be provided if the bid award will exceed $100,000. The vendor is certifying that it has not and will not use federally appropriated funds to pay any person or organization for influencing or attempting to influence an officer or employee of any agency, a member of Congress, officer or employees of Congress, or an employee of a member of Congress in connection with obtaining any federal contract, grant, or award. The vendor must also disclose any lobbying with non-federal funds that takes place in connection with obtaining any federal award. Oftentimes, I get questions that could very easily be answered by SFA directors if they would look at the procurement plan. It's not just a plan that the SFA is required to have by USDA. It gives you step-by-step instructions on what is required with each type of procurement. It's a great tool to use. When an SFA director asks me to review a bid document, I open up the document and the procurement plan and compare the two. If it contains all of the requirements in the plan, then the SFA is safe to use the proposal. Now, the state agency does not approve proposals or disapprove proposals, but I will point out missing requirements and even make suggestions. There are some optional items in the procurement plan, such as disqualifying a bidder and adding the goods and services to the contract. But for the most part, the procurement plan consists of the requirements the SFA should use to develop the bid. And don't forget about your code of conduct. The code of conduct must be included, must include all of the requirements, all of the required elements that are in the procurement plan. The required elements are that no employee, officer, or agent of the School Food Authority can participate in the selection or the award or administration of a contract supported by program funds if a conflict of interest, real or apparent, would be involved. can't accept gratuities or favors or anything of monetary value. And the code of conduct must be signed by all employees involved in the procurement process. There is no reason to reinvent the wheel. A blank code of conduct form is included in the sample procurement plan and can be used by SFAs. And each person participating in the procurement process must sign the form. And then each year you upload those forms to the CMP website with your application. You do not have to do another one. If the participants remain the same, you can simply re-upload the signed forms to the website. But always remember that if you're going to use your own code of conduct, then you must make sure that it includes the disciplinary action that you are going to use. And finally, I just kind of added this. It's not really about procurement, but I have been asked by several SFAs about the Dining Alliance rebates. The Dining Alliance is a group purchasing organization, and they provide food service operators with rebates on products that they are already purchasing. While the SFA cannot purchase from a GPO without the required documents on each procurement, you may join the Dining Alliance and receive rebates on products that you already purchase. Of course, the rebates must accrue to the nonprofit school food service account and can't be used for any other purpose than the child nutrition program. As a reminder, this webinar will be posted on the CMP website under School Food Service, Resources, and Trainings. We encourage you to contact the Division of Nutrition Support if you have any questions or concerns. After the webinar is over, don't forget to complete the evaluation by going onto the Louisiana Fit Kids website, clicking on today's training. A pop-up will appear that states, "Click here to complete the evaluation for this meeting." You complete the survey for the meeting and click the submit button. And then you'll receive a confirmation email that you attended the training. Oh, and that is it for today and the last of our procurement series. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll try to answer them.
There are some questions in the chat box, but they only had an option to send to you or me. And so Helen Robinson asked, if professional services must be procured, then does the service provided by that vendor on their own equipment be procured also? For example, a vendor that installed a hood, do you have to procure, or can you call the vendor to repair the item that they installed with specific parts that only they have?
I understand the question, and it's a long response. So Helen, I need to call you after we get off of this training, and we can discuss that.
And I think Allison Russell said she sent you a question in the chat. If you can't find it, Allison, maybe you can speak up and ask the question. You can unmute yourself. Well, I guess maybe she doesn't want to ask the question, Babette. Sheila Nolan asked if the, oh, she doesn't have a microphone.
Oh, that could cause a problem, couldn't it?
Yeah, well, and I guess you didn't see the question in the chat then. I don't know,
I see one from Allison,
that's the one.
but that's asking about the professional services. It's kind of like a sole source procurement. So there's some ifs there. So I've got to discuss their specific case to see what steps we need to take next.
Gotcha. The slides will be posted on the website. Once I receive the slides, they will be posted on the website, and this meeting has been recorded, so we will post the video of the meeting, and Babette's lovely voice will be heard.
Hold on, Dr. Champagne. We do have one question on rebates on food. Does it have to go back to the food account if the rebate was on food purchases? It has to go back to child nutrition. I don't think there is any specification that it has to go back to a quote unquote food account just because it was on food purchases, but it does have to go back to the child nutrition fund.
I haven't seen any other questions.
Okay. So as always, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or concerns. We wish you a very happy weekend, and everyone take care. Good afternoon.